right. Welcome everybody for the second wine talk of the day, the Secrets of Languedoc. I have a great pleasure of welcoming Samuel Guibertin from Daumas, Gassacin, to be here with us. Welcome, Samuel.
Bonjour. Bonjour. All right, so everyone speaks French, so we can continue the tasting in French. Make it easier for me.
Samuel arrived this morning all wet. Well, I guess all of you arrived all wet, but he was happy because they haven't seen rain in France for about 2 months.
Actually, I arrived dry from France, but wet here.
Yeah.
We haven't seen rain for 2 months this summer, which is actually better than last year. Last year, the last rain was on the 28th of May, and no rain in June, no rain in July, and fortunately, we had 100 millimeters of rain on the 15th of August, which saved the 2022 harvest. It made the harvest, it's the first time I've seen such an amount of rain. 100 millimeters is quite a lot, but instead of turning the harvest bad, it actually made it from good to excellent. It's extremely rare to have that much rain and make it good from a quantity point of view, but also from a quality point of view. This year, we don't have that same issue. It was just very, very, very hot last week. Last week was 49 degrees for 4 days. So and on Friday it went down to 19 degrees. We lost 30 degrees in 12 hours. It was okay for the vineyard, but 4 days was maximum. More than that, and probably we would have lost about 40% of the harvest. And if you saw me quite a bit on my phone today, it's because the harvest started this morning. Usually, I'd never go out of the estate during the harvest because I'm in charge of the winemaking. So I'm like constantly on WhatsApp and email and everything to check what's happening and if it's going well. So far it's going well. If you see me running out quickly, it's because I have to go back. But I think we have time for
we have an hour and then he's actually going to leave. So, but we'll obviously thank you for being here on a crazy time like this, but also thank you for showcasing 5 amazing wines. I mean, I'm sure a lot of the people in the audience know that these are not your everyday bottles that we have. We have quite a strict allocation also for Finland. As you can see on the tasting mat, a lot of the vintages that you are tasting now are already sold out. We do have a generous addition to the possible generous addition to the allocation that we have. So we do have the next vintages of the white and the red coming in March 2024. Most of those have already been reserved, but if there was some of you who would like to reserve a tiny collection into your restaurants, come and talk to me after the talk, and we'll see what we can do. But Samuel, tell us your family story. I mean, you guys are pioneers in Languedoc doing what you do. Your parents, Aime and Veronique, they went there back in 1972, I believe?
Indeed. In everything, you need a lot of work, some kind of finance to succeed, and some luck as well. And it all started in 1971, and I'll try to make it short because the story is fascinating, but we have more points to talk about. And both my parents didn't come from the winemaking industry. They definitely drank wine, but that doesn't translate into being a winemaker. And so they were looking for a house in between both their hometown, Millau, where my father was involved in the leather business for clothes, and my mother lived in Montpellier, so southern France. And they found this very old house called Mas Daumas. Mas in the southern France means farmhouse. So when you see Mas pretty much everywhere for a restaurant, for a winery nowadays, it means typically it was an old farmhouse. They purchased this old farm with no intention to make wine, just looking a place to raise 5 boys. I'm the eldest of 5 boys, so we take quite a bit of place. And in order not to destroy the city of Montpellier, they wanted to take us out. With the farm came some land, but no vineyard, just half an hectare of Clairette, white grape variety called Clairette, which is strange because typically Languedoc was more known for its red. And for a couple of years, they didn't do much of it. And then they thought about, look, the farmhouse come with some land, let's plant something. At that time, vineyard was not the way to go in the southern France. People were struggling to make wine, to sell wine. So if you wanted to make maybe a living or not waste your time, melon, asparagus, potatoes, carrots, olive tree, anything but vine. And so my dad, before planting one of those things, asked a friend of his who was at the time a geologist, not just any geologist. He was the dean, the university master dean of Bordeaux Geography University. So he was a soil expert. And on top of that, being in Bordeaux, a soil expert, terroir expert for vine. His name was Henri Enjalbert. And Henri Enjalbert was from the same city as my dad and accepted to come and spend a couple of days to look at the soil and advise whether we should plant carrots or potatoes. Fortunately for us, otherwise we would not be here, or maybe just tasting carrots and potatoes. He came back after a couple of days and said, I found in this valley called the Gassacin Valley, so Daumas, farmhouse of the Daumas family. Gassacin Valley, the name Gassac comes from the name of the river that flows in the middle of that tiny valley. Don't look for it on Google Map, it doesn't even appear. It's lost in the middle of 5,000 hectares of forest. We call that the Garrigue in the southern France. And he said, Henri Enjalbert said, I found a terroir here in this valley that I cannot explain, but it looks to me very similar to what I might have seen in Côte d'Or. It's not exactly the same, but I believe you have the terroir to make a Grand Cru wine. He quickly added, typically this kind of wine takes about 200 years to make, to get to that level, and quite a lot of investment in terms of energy. So I don't recommend you do that, but the potential is there. And I think my parents, not being from the wine industry, didn't realize the amount of work it was going to take. So they decided to plant vine, and the rest is history. 50 years later, the Gassacin wines are distributed in 80 countries around the world, sold out, and small production, but very sought after.
And how did people respond to this, crazy idea that your parents started making wine? Did other people, think of them to be crazy, or did they actually follow what they were doing? And what was the reaction locally?
So locally, everyone thought we were crazy, or they were crazy. We still work with some. I'm thinking of like a carpenter and a builder that help building the winery. And the guy say, at the time, we thought your parents were mad, but since they were paying the bill, we'll do the job and help building the winery. The French market was very dubious about a fine wine in a region that was known for bulk wine. And for the most part of the 80s, the first vintage of Daumas Gassacin was 78. So most part of the 80s, the French market kind of mostly turned its back onto Daumas Gassacin, apart from a few wine passionate people that tasted and said, this is great. So it was mostly initially 90% export market. Nowadays it's more 40, 60, but it took a long time. And I still remember I was 17, 18 years old. It was the Salon des Vins de Lyon in the early 90s. And we were the only wine from the southern France in showing a wine in the Salon de Lyon. You had plenty of Burgundy, a few Bordeaux, Rhône Valley, but none from below Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And people would look and see Languedoc and kind of turn their back and run away almost. Today, 30 years later, that wine fair in Lyon is our most successful wine fair. So it has taken a while. A lot of people have caught up. Obviously, nowadays you can go in any village of the southern France and find wineries spreading everywhere, doing amazing things. But back then, there was not many other vineyards doing what we were doing.
Okay. So what is so special about Languedoc to you?
So I've lived in the US, in Napa, I've lived in New Zealand and Australia, and there's a lot of things that are special about any area. But if we focus in Languedoc, first of all, it's the largest wine region of the world. The total production of Languedoc wine is larger than total production of Australian wine, for example. That means there is a lot of diversity. You find almost any grape varieties planted there. Some with success, some with less. You have terroirs that are right by the sea. You have terroirs that are 800 meters altitude. The diversity of the Languedoc is fascinating. And that's what's making fascinating, but also very complicated to approach. Rather than looking at Burgundy, which has 2 grape varieties, and yes, a few appellations, but in a tiny, tiny spot. You're looking at something spread out over thousands of kilometers almost, or hundreds of kilometers. So it takes a long time to comprehend the Languedoc. And because it is a younger, although vine has been growing there for 100 years, but in terms of quality, it's only in the last 20 years that the Languedoc has emerged. It makes it even more complicated. And the fact that it's dominated by tiny producer, we consider as almost a big one, and we are small. It makes it even more interesting, but also complicated, because it's not black and white. It changes from one valley to another, and it doesn't have established appellation. The most popular appellation are the new one, the Pic Saint-Loup, Terrasse du Larzac, if you have heard of them, because most of us haven't heard of them. The historical one, the Corbière, the Fitou, that have existed for 50 years, are not the most famous one, despite what one could think.
Mm-hmm. And your wines, do they belong to certain appellations?
Zero appellation. Back in the 70s, with that specific terroir, Languedoc has been dominated by red wine. Typically Grenache, Carignan, Mourvèdre, Syrah, those warmer red grape varieties. And so when my parents decided to plant, they went towards the cooler climate grape varieties. So for our red, it's dominated by Cabernet Sauvignon, about 60 to 70%, because the terroir of the Gassac Valley require that. We've tried the Grenache, we've tried the Mourvèdre, they don't do well at Gassac. You go 5 kilometers away, they do great, but not at Gassac. And in order to make it even more complicated for you, if you count the total grape varieties between the one red and one white we produce, we reach 40 grape varieties, 40, 20 in the white, 20 in the red, more or less. I'll explain those a bit later, but it's all about achieving complexity. And we were in an area that didn't have any appellation initially. We were pre-appellation. So when the appellation Coteaux du Languedoc and then Terrasse du Languedoc appeared where we are, they look at the common denominator. The common denominator was Syrah, Grenache, Mourvèdre, not Cabernet Sauvignon or not Chardonnay, Viognier. So by default, we are not included. If I pull out all my vine and plant what's required by the appellation, we could claim the appellation. But Thomas Gassac nowadays has a strong, without sounding egoistic, has a stronger brand than the local appellation.
Well, speaking of diversity, we're starting with a rosé sparkling. It's not something that first comes into mind when you're thinking about Languedoc. So.
No, and still, it's a second Thomas Gassac wine ever made. It's a result of a mistake, like many things. We've always made a red since 78. The white was first made in 86, but the first attempt of making a white was in 82. And there was a mistake because the guy that was loading, we handpick everything, loading the box full of grapes, let a couple of red grape into the tank of white. And you don't need many red grapes to just completely change the color. Try it, you put a strawberry or blackberry syrup into a bit of water and just a little bit turn the water no longer clear but slightly pink. And that's what happened. And based on that, the first year was a still rosé, and the second year, my parents had spent 3 months in Italy enjoying the old style Prosecco, made as Charmat or cuve close, one fermentation, no dosage, no liquor, no gas, no sugar, no yeast, nothing added. Just you trap the wine, put the wine in a stainless steel tank, totally hermetically sealed, you let it ferment, and you trap the fermenting gas. It's pretty hard, actually pretty challenging to make. But that's what was achieved the second year of production. 90% of the wine is Cabernet Sauvignon. So that again is another challenge. I have seen a couple of Cabernet Franc Rosé. Cabernet Sauvignon Rosé is very rare. And Cabernet Sauvignon Sparkling Rosé, I've never seen anything else like that. But we use the younger vine or the vine that we feel are not great enough to go in the red to make the Cabernet Sauvignon. And today, actually, at 2 o'clock in the morning, or 4 o'clock in the morning last night, we started the picking of the Cabernet Sauvignon 4 weeks before we will pick it for the red, because we pick it at about 10.5, 11% alcohol. Cabernet Sauvignon, if you wait, you're going to get those tannin, those ripeness, the beautiful, but that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for freshness, the red fruit, so it has to be picked quite early, 10.5, 11.5 alcohol, to retain, to provide the red fruit berries, but retain a lot of freshness and a lot of acidity, which is going to keep it fresh.
Tell us about your, please go ahead and taste the wines whenever you feel like it. Tell us about your approach in the vineyards. I know that Languedoc-Roussillon is one of the areas where there's a lot of organic and biodynamic production, also because the weather is relatively favorable for that kind of viticulture. What's your take on this?
It's a take of someone who inherited from a land that had always been protected by my parents, and before them, by the Daumas family that were farmers. When my parents purchased a farm from the Daumas family, those guys, there was one John Daumas, and his two sisters, 75, 77 years old, still working the land like you would see in the movie in the 19th century. They didn't own a tractor, they didn't own a car, they didn't have running electricity, and they got the water from the well. I mean, it looks very scenic, but when you have to work a farm just with your hand and a horse, can tell you that it kills you. And so the word, but at the time, the word organic or biodynamic or natural didn't exist. Even in the 70s, even the 80s. Again, same story about the Salon de Vin de Lyon. When I tell people, we don't use chemical in the, people wouldn't care. Nowadays, people care. I mean, it's beautiful evolution, but it's interesting to see that 20, 30 years ago, when my parents decided to continue that way. First of all, to keep any trees that was, the term agroforestery is also quite trendy nowadays. The Gassacin vineyard is not one vineyard. It's actually 67 plots of vine decimated in about 4,000 hectares of forest. So if you want to see the whole vineyard at one go, you have to fly over or take a small path that will take you through the forest, small clearings, half an hectare, 1 hectare. It's actually stunning. It's a lot more work because you can't take a tractor and just do one big row. But that's why we do everything by hand. And in the long run, working with keeping all those trees and the term agroforestery has a reason behind it. It protects from the roots of the trees, protect from erosion when we have big rainfall in October. The trees kind of act as a fence against either the disease that can spread from other vineyard or the chemical that can fly from other vineyard. And then the birds living in the surrounding tend to eat the bugs that will affect the vineyard. So not something you see right away, but in the long run, you discover the benefits over time. And so we were brought up by living on the estate. We drink the water from the Gassacin spring still. Tomorrow we start spraying. The first thing that gets damaged is the water underneath. So there is a whole philosophy pre-organic. We're not doing it to be organic or to be biodynamic. We're doing it first because we live on the estate and we want our kids to continue living there freely and safely. And fortunately, that's a good thing for the vine that we grow. But I think it's more a way of life than anything else.
Sure. Well, you mentioned that your vineyards are divided into 67 different plots, and in general, I believe Languedoc is rather fragmented, and that's why, because there's so many different small growers, there's been a lot of cooperative movements as well. How do you see the role of co-ops in the whole area now, and do you see, because you mentioned earlier that Languedoc was thought to be like a bulk wine area, and then your parents started changing that picture. Where do you see the cooperatives today stand?
I think I'll be very careful to make a strong statement, because if you stop still long enough, you're always going to be back at the beginning at some point of the trend. Cave Co-op were an amazing invention in the 20s or 30s when the Languedoc was making fortune out of bulk wine. There was only France was the only exporter of wine. Italy and Spain didn't export at the time, and there was no Australia, Chile, Argentina, South Africa, and so on. So the Languedoc was a specialist of bulk wine, supplying the whole of Europe with average everyday wine, and they make fortune until the 60s, 70s, when the modernization started to appear, and then other regions of France, but also Italy, Spain, and the rest started to produce. And because Cave Co-op had relied on what they were doing without modernizing, without also being proactive, they started to struggle. And they are an amazing machine for producing. They were an amazing machine for producing when you knew one village could count, 400. I think if you live in the village, everyone living in that village would have 1 hectare or 20 hectares of vineyard. And rather than cultivating on their own, they'll pick the grape and send it to the caf coop. The problem with the caf coop in the 70s, 80s, that they were not set up to sell. They were used to you coming to them and saying, oh, I need this tank and so on. But when people start to have more choice and start to go elsewhere, the caf co-ops only stand still, and we're not proactive as going out and saying, hey, look, we make an amazing Picpoul or an amazing Grenache and so on. So they struggle. The last 10 years, we've seen a lot of caf co-op purchasing each other, so making a larger group, being much more modern in their technique, but also in their way of selling wine. And it's an extremely strong tool for making great everyday fine wine. And by everyday, there's more Fiat or Peugeot driven in this world than Ferrari and Lamborghini. We all aim at the Lamborghini and the Ferrari, but most of us drink a Peugeot or a Fiat. So I see an amazing achievement challenge on making an amazing $10, $15, $20 bottle of wine than 100 or 150. That's where almost the real challenge is, to make an amazing wine for great value.
Yeah, that's same, I guess, for the sommeliers or buyers. It's easier to buy an established wine because it's already expensive, so people know that it's going to be amazing. But when you find value with €15, that's a totally different thing, right?
Indeed.
And you have a full portfolio. So apart from how do you say, Master Daumas, did you actually say the S's?
The great thing about the S's is you can say it or not say it. If you say Mas, Daumas, Gassac, it's a lot of S's. So yeah. Mas, Daumas, Gassac, the second S is usually not pronounced. But depending you're in the south of France where we pronounce every letter, or in the north where they don't, I think you're safe doing anything. So you're right. Nowadays we have two estates. Mas, Daumas, Gassac, the Grand Cru estate, one red, one white, one sparkling rosé. And then we have a second estate that was founded by my dad as well in 1989, Moulin de Gassac, where we produce a range of more everyday, affordable wine with the same philosophy that leads Master Daumas Gassac. And I have found, Master Daumas Gassac is well established and there's still a lot of work and a lot of challenges, but the main challenges is how to make the best wine for, with everyday kind of price point and everyday, and especially nowadays when you see, this past year, and everyone has seen that in their field, but certainly we get in January or in December, we get the glassmaker announcing 30% increase. Now the average of the last 20 years was 2 to 3% per year. In 1 year, 30% increase on a glass bottle. If you make $100 bottle of wine, it's not going to see that. But if you make a bottle of wine that goes to the exporter, about €2.50, €3 bottle of wine, I can tell you that certainly the glass bottle become more expensive than the price of the actual juice. So the guys who grow the grapes is actually not getting any money, or at least less money than the guys who make the glass bottle. It's a bit crazy, but that's how we work. So the challenges are real there in that category.
Well, let's taste the two whites. So we have two vintages represented here. The first one on the left is 21, and then the second is 22. And tell us about your white wine.
Right. So in the white Daumas Gassac, there are 4 pillars. And if we go as we taste, so first the nose, we start with the Viognier, 20% Viognier, that fresh apricot, white peach, acacia kind of notes. The Viognier tend to be more fragrant in the first 2 or 3 years. If you tasted a white 2012, for example, I had Magnum 10 days ago, we no longer get the Viognier. We get more of the creaminess that come from the second grape variety, Chardonnay, about 20% as well. And that, in the youth, probably you don't feel as much, but as it ages, Chardonnay takes more place. The number 3 and number 4, 20% as well, we don't taste them as easily. Petit Manzin, Jurançon grape varieties in the southwest, that brings a lot of acidity. It's one of those grape varieties that, right now we are about to harvest. And one of the things we do when we go before harvesting, taste the grapes in the vineyard, but also look at the charts. Usually before you harvest, you look at sugar and acidity. When the grapes get ripe, the sugar chart goes up, but in the same time, the acidity chart goes down. So the key is to pick at the right time. Petit Manzin is one of those where sugar chart goes up and acidity keeps going up, but very hard to grow. Otherwise, everyone will use that tool to preserve freshness. And last but not least, the Chenin Blanc, about 20%. which add a bit of a nutty character that will mostly appear after 3 or 4 years. There are another 15 grape varieties that account for 1 or 2%. Cercial from Madeira, Petit Arvin from Switzerland, Muscat d'Alexandrie, Muscat de Rivesaltes, Sémillon, Marsanne-Roussanne, 1 or 2%. And those act, I don't know if some of you cook, obviously your restaurant, so there must be someone cooking somewhere in your place. But you know, it's more fun to cook with a bit of spices, salt, pepper. You don't need a lot of pepper to bring flavor to a dish, or spice to bring flavor. It's the same concept, at least for Daumas Gassac. I'm not talking generally for the vineyard. I'm just talking for Daumas Gassac here. One of our things, we have a philosophy of finesse, complexity, and balance. Complexity is achieved by using all those grape varieties. Balance is achieved by picking at the right time, not always looking for over-ripeness. But also when you use many grape varieties, you might get the Chardonnay at 14.5, but the Chenin will be picked at 12.5, and the average will give 13. And since our goal is always to keep a very moderate alcohol, 12.5, 13%, but a strong acidity to keep things fresh and mineral, it's one of the ways to achieve that, to have all those ingredients that then the real challenge is to blend them rightly so you get the best blend. And of course you will get the impact of the vintage, because we make vintage wine. We're not trying to achieve Coca-Cola in a bottle. You know, not every bottle is the same, not of every vintage. If I have 4 brothers, if you look at the 5 of us line, we don't look alike. But if you look closely, there's a family trait. And I like to think that it's the same way with if you taste many vintage of Daumas Gassac. You take 10 vintage of Daumas Gassac, red or white, it's not the same wine. But if you taste carefully, there is a family trait that comes back in each of them. And 21 and 22 are 2 good examples. 21, you know, I've had so many people tasting out there and saying, oh, 21 is a challenging, and it has been challenging in most part. But fortunately in the south, where we pray for rain rather than trying to avoid it, 21 was a beautiful vintage, actually. It's one very, very mature vintage with a lot of freshness. And then you have 22, where I mentioned we had 2.5 months of dry weather, which did impact the grape, and get something a lot fuller, a bit less acidity, a bit richer. So while the Gassac trait remain in both vintage, there is definitely the vintage characteristic that we're not trying to avoid.
And how did you end up having all these varieties? Was it by, you know, your parents trying different things, what would work in the Gassac Valley, or how did you end up having so many different varieties grown in your vineyards that are now blended into your wine? Because you started with Cabernet Sauvignon.
I cannot take responsibility for that. It was really my parents. You know, they didn't come from the wine business. They were open-minded to a lot of things. They arrived in a region which, if you look at 99.9% of the people, they were either putting out vine or sending it to Cave Co-op, which were very unsuccessful at selling wine. So it was really in the doldrum. But so they came at it with open eyes, and they decided to learn. In order to learn, to spend a lot of time every year for 10 years. They spent 3 months traveling around mostly Europe to taste wine from Georgia, Italy, Spain, Switzerland, Mallorca, a bit everywhere, Israel. And each time they found a wine that they like, they asked the vine grower if they could get a few cuttings, just to try them back home. Now, when you try a vine, it's not like trying a recipe where you can do it overnight. When you try a vine, you plant it 4 years to 5 years before you get the first fruit that you can use. So it's a minimum 5 years turnaround. So if it doesn't work, you're not going to put it out right away. You're going to give it a few years to see. But over time, they planted what is known as a patchwork of ancient grape varieties, quite endemic to each region or each country of Europe, which is the heart, actually Middle East is the heart of the birth of the winemaking and the vine, most of the winemaking. And so in the end, we are now the second generation more in the, I won't say the business, but the time of replanting. If you have a vineyard of, let's say, 50 hectares and you wait for everything to be 90 years old, well, you're going to pull everything at once. And then by the time you let the vine rest, let the soil rest, plant harvest, it's going to be almost a 10 years turnaround with 0 wine. So we are now 50 years of age. We need to start, and we have a plan where for the next 25 years, we have to pull out between 2 and 2.5 hectares of vine, let it rest, let the soil rest with nothing on it for 3 years, replant, and then wait at least 5 years too. So it's 8 years turnaround. It's a big job in terms of kind of planning it, but also doing it, making sure there is during those 2 or 3 months where there is zero rainfall. It's okay for an old vine which has roots 30 meters down. But what you do with a 1 year old vine, it's almost saying, I have a newborn child and I'm going for the first 2 years not help him or her to get feed. The vine needs irrigation, so you need a lot of work to bring the water, not a lot, but every month, once a month, a bit of irrigation. Otherwise, you lose the first year 50% of the new plant. And to plant 1 hectare, it's about 20 to 25,000 euro. So you don't want to lose 50% the first year and 30% the second year.
You were talking about the 4 pillars of this wine, the white wine, and at what age certain things come up. Chardonnay and Chenin comes with a bit of age. What would you say is the perfect age for these whites to be drank?
Fortunately, we don't love the same thing. We don't love the same look. We don't love the same taste. What I do at home, I can only talk about that. It's like also asking what is your favorite vintage. At home, I will drink the whites, especially like something like the 21, in the first 2 or 3 years when it's very fresh. Then I forget about it. And because I'm the winemaker, I have a larger allocation than most. I take it in magnums. And I tend to wait 8 to 12 years to drink the magnums. Right now, I found the 2012, 11, 10, 13, absolutely fantastic in a magnum. It's completely different to what we have here. It's more food orientated, definitely. Where here you can enjoy it almost by itself. But it's not everybody's cup of tea. The French don't have that culture of drinking all the wines. English have that a lot more. Same goes with the American. I'm talking generally speaking, they tend to like wine more in the youth, when it's vibrant, when it's fruit forward. But you go to England, they want everything old. There's a culture of drinking that plays there. So it depends on everybody's cup of tea. But one thing for sure is Master Gassacin, and if the term Grand Cru has been given to our estate, it's because of its ability not to age for a few years, but to be able to improve over 10, 20, 30, 50 years of age. And that's quite unique because you can make wine, and we see it with the wine we make that stand very well for a few years. But to actually improve and get kind of a better of 20 years of age, that's extremely rare, and only the terroir can provide you that.
So just over the last weekend, there was a lot of newspaper articles about the current situation in the world where consumption of wine has decreased a lot. The European Commission released some data, stating crazy numbers like year to June, the consumption of, for example, Portuguese was decreased 34% and 22% in Germany. And you said earlier the Languedoc is producing more wine than Australia or Chile or South Africa in total. How do you see the decreasing consumption affecting Languedoc? Maybe not your allocated wines because you're in a lucky position, but in general the region, and what can the region do to kind of combat on that?
The region already did a big part when in the 90s the European community decided there was a wine glut over the world. So again, we wait 30 years and we get back to the same point. And the main responsible at the time was pointed to be the Languedoc. It wasn't, but it was easier to go after the Languedoc for various reasons. And people started putting out vine. If you were a vine grower, you would receive 10,000 euro for each hectare you pulled out. Most people took a shortcut because the vineyard that got pulled out were not the young vineyard producing a lot of wine in the plain, but the old vineyard, 50, 60 years old Grenache, magnificent on the hill, but hard to work. So Languedoc has still lost 40% of its vineyard over the last 30 years. I think the main thing is education, and the second thing is quality. and if wine consumption decrease, there is still more wine drinkers over the world than there was 30 years ago. Every single country that start producing wine tend to start drinking wine. Maybe not at a fast pace, but you took China. I mean, I was in New Zealand when they started producing more heavily wine. The generation that my friend's generation had not been raised with wine on the table, but they raised their kids with wine on the table. So there is still a wine consumption that increased in some part, but with education, and the rest we'll see. I cannot tell you what the future holds. I look at it, and 30 years ago we were talking about a wine overproduction. Are we going to go towards that? Maybe. Sometimes it's a way also to eliminate some part that are not doing too well. I'm not sure. So far, the Languedoc, through its tiny producer, seems to be doing a lot better than 30 years ago or 40 years ago through the big wine producer. And it's interesting to see that 40 years ago, Bordeaux was leading. Everyone was raving about Bordeaux, and business-wise, it was doing so well. Right now, I think there are more people struggling in Bordeaux making wine than in Languedoc 30 years ago. And in Australia, in the early 2000s, Australia was going to take over the world of winemaking, dominate everything, and suddenly it disappeared within 10 years for various reasons, water usage and so on, cost of production, but things go fast. So I'm not quite sure. Our aim is to do well what we do, and keep a very kind of friendly approach. We're not, I hear a lot about Burgundy, and Burgundy has a blessing. It's been there for a few hundred years. It makes amazing wine, but it's also a tiny region. But you have to be careful. Bordeaux was on everybody's mouth 40 years ago. Now, I was talking to a friend. I said, I don't remember a day in the last 10 years when I went out with a friend and someone said, let's order a Bordeaux. It's sad. I was raised with the greatest Bordeaux 61, 70, so I remember those. But things can go very fast.
So you kind of, as a producer, you have to be constantly doing better and better, I believe.
The search for excellence is a constant search, at least, for the Gassacin, but then we apply it for the rest. And the fact of being here, it's very easy when you are in your own little paradise, small valley, surrounded by trees, a river that flows in the middle, 35 degrees, a swimming pool and some grapes. Well, what can go wrong? But sometimes you can be disconnected to the people who drink your wine, the people who enjoy your wine. And it doesn't, I'm not talking wine expert, I'm talking people who enjoy wine, whether they know a lot or not. So spending time on the market, my brother and I, we do a lot of those visits. It's a way also to keep your mind open and see how the wine world evolved, not just in the vineyard, but also in the market.
So you are 5 brothers, and you are the second generation. How was the generational switch in your family? Unfortunately, your father passed away a couple of years ago. And what do you feel? Do you feel like you're taking his, and your mother is obviously still alive, and are you taking the legacy forward, or are you adding your own touch, or how has it been for you and your brothers to take in charge?
So I've been back for a while now, 23 years, 2000. But I know initially, I can only talk about Gassacin. It's rare to have one generation going so high right away in terms of recognition. So I think our approach was to say, and I'm in charge of the winemaking as well as the export, but my approach was to say, I want to make sure that when I fully take over the winemaking, no one can point a year saying, this is the year Samuel took over. Whether it's better or worse, I wanted to make sure the continuity was there and that there was no gap, either deep or high. High would have been great, but no deep. And that it's the Gassacin flavor, philosophy remained the same. That once that was done, then it was time to look at different new ways to do things, and also give you an example, but it's not the only one. My father was of that generation where they like wine that you had to chew. But even the 10 euro bottle of wine, you have to chew it, like really the thing that grip your mouth and so on. And I've seen a lot of his friends, Edouard Durbach from Trévalon and same generation, they like the same wine. Today, people are much more into elegance, finesse, the same ageability, but a lot more elegance and finesse in the youth. And I know that in terms of winemaking technique, I'm talking about how we macerate the grapes, when we pick, things like that, very subtle. We have evolved to give a lot more finesse and elegance in the Gassacin wine. Now, my father was still be there, he'll probably disagree, probably say, hey, I like it when you had to chew it, but that's wine evolved with time. And the way we made wine 100 years ago is different to nowadays, and that's normal. But it still remains a Daumas Gassacin in the style, and we actually make very conscious decision to preserve. It all starts in the vineyard, not in the cellar. To start in the vineyard, the decision we make in the vineyard is to keep that Daumas Gassacin philosophy.
So we have a 10-year-old wine here. So the first red is a 2013 vintage. Tell us about the reds and the two vintages that we're tasting.
So Mas Daumas Gassacin is a result of one. There is one grape variety we call the king grape variety of the Gassacin Valley. It's Cabernet Sauvignon. Always be. It's the one we harvest last. For your information, today we had 53 harvesters arriving at the estate. Half of them will be lodged on the estate from 15 different nationalities, and that has been going on since 1978. And why do we do it by hand? Well, for quality reasons, but also when you have so many grape varieties, so Cabernet Sauvignon, but also Cabernet Franc, Malbec, Merlot, Pinot Noir, Nebbiolo, Dolcetto, Tannat, Tempranillo, Petit Verdot, Syrah, Condorny, and a few that I can't pronounce or remember. But because that gives us the ability to go and pick each grape varieties at the right time. So every day we'll go out with a team and decide what's ready, what's not. We've been doing that for the last 3 weeks, and doing that by hand. That's already give us a great ability to decide at the last minute. It's Mas Daumas Gassacin, same thing. You can approach it in the youth. If you try the 2021, if I'm correct, you can approach it in the youth and you'll still have the vibrancy of the fruit, the Cabernet Sauvignon, a lot more elegant, a lot more finesse than what we used to have 20 years ago. Not just because of me or my team, also because the vineyard is 50 years of age. A vineyard that is less than 20 years of age is always going to give you quite a rough, how to describe it, quite a rough, but also unpolished kind of fruits that can be a bit more aggressive. The older it gets, the less fruit you get, but the softer it gets. So it's not just what we do in the cellar. It's mostly what happened in the vineyard. And if we do keep 70% of old vine, at least 25 years of age, we're going to get that softer fruit. And especially for the Cabernet Sauvignon, rustic. That's the word I was looking for. That can be quite rustic and aggressive in the youth and quite tannic. All the other grape varieties bring their little spice, their little layers of flavors. And this is a good example of, tasting what it is right now. 21 is already 2 years old, and what it is 10 years later. We have the 10 years old wine come from our cellar. We, in 2006, I put in place with my brothers what we call a 10 years program. We put aside, 200 cases of the wine of the year, and it stays in our cellar untouched in a bottle for 10 years, and then we release it. It's a way to be able to offer the market a very tiny parcel, we don't have enough, but at a decent price, and to make sure that it is perfectly kept, since all our cellars are underground.
And so next March we have the 2023 white and the 2022 red coming to the market. So what can we expect of these two wines? I believe 2022 was quite warm.
So 23, too early to talk about it. Yeah. It's the white 23. We'll start picking it on Wednesday if everything goes well. It looks so far like more like a 21. Because we had very fresh nights. We had our average temperature during the nights over July and August is about 15 to 16 degrees, while the days are over 30. So that's it helps really slowing down the maturation of the grapes and keeping the freshness and acidity. For the red 22 is currently in the barrel. It's got it's a iron fist in a velvet glove, meaning you definitely have the tannin, but that's normal. The wine is still young and still has 8 months to go in aging. But you have this roundness around it, this elegance. It is a Cabernet Sauvignon made with a Burgundy philosophy, kind of in terms of softness and roundness. So it's very small production because we had very little water, and in the end, so that reduced the juice, that concentrate the juice in the berries. But what we have, I believe, will be exceptional. Although we still have 8 months for the aging, so we still have to make sure we make no mistake until then.
No resting on your laurels. So you mentioned you had 4 days of 49 degrees Celsius. That's crazy, right? That's the climate reality we have at the moment. What else do you see happening in your area, and what are you doing about it?
Well, there are things you cannot do anything about. We had frost four times over the last 6 years, when for the previous 30 years we only had frost 2 times. What do you want me to do about it? Apart from, the team and I are up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and we light hay bale or candles or things like that. Now we are much more equipped. Before, when it happened one time over 20 years, we were very lightly equipped. Now we are much more equipped, and we have sensor around the vineyard that tell us to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and we pray every night for. There's 1 week where that we don't have to wake up, because it's painful to see. In 2021, I was in the vineyard with the team, and I saw in half an hour you see all the leaves turning black in half an hour, and then it's gone. You've lost 6 months. The team has worked pruning the vineyard all through winter, when it's cold and so on, and suddenly you lose everything in 1 hour. In 2019, we had this 50 degrees day, 50 degrees Celsius day on the 27th of June. I remember because I took my team to go and visit Jean-Louis Chave, and we were on the way back, and the temperature kept rising, and 50 degrees in the middle of the day. 50 degrees July, August, the vineyard can cope, but in June, when it's still not even ripe, we lost in 2 hours. We lost 40% of the white and about 30% of the early red. There's not much thing you can do about that. We've already done everything we can do. We're planting more trees. Agroforestry is a good protection. It shades, it creates natural, it's called evapotranspiration, so humidity from the leaves of the tree that brings water to the vine. But when you get 50 degrees or a frost that is -8, frost at -2, 3, 4, you can combat. -8, you cannot do anything. So we can pray, we can hope, we can continue doing our best. It's not every year. This year we have not been touched by anything like that. And we went, the funny thing, the strange thing, it went from 49 to 19. We lost 30 degrees in overnight. That's a real crazy thing, is 49, 19. 19 is much easier to do the harvest than 49. That is what we have to work with. Having so many grape varieties give us also the ability to see which one do well on this condition. Some, are more adapted to the frost. Some are more adapted to the drought or the heat. Because you don't see it in over 1 year. You have to look at it over 5 or 6 or 10 years to really see the trend. And so we try to, you say, not rest on our laurel. I think Master Gassacin is known as the pioneer, the Grand Cru. But what we say to our team is constantly bring new ideas. It's great when we're a team of 40 people, when we have newcomers, because with newcomers come new ideas as well, a new way to look at things, new questions. It's fundamental, because while it's agriculture and it looks like nothing happened very fast, it takes 8 years to get a wine. It's not fast, but there are some businesses or in the wine world that go even slower. I went to visit our Cooper. Cooper is the one who makes the barrels. To make a barrel, they use trees that have been growing for 200 years. Last year I was in Portugal to meet with our cork maker. The cork is harvested every 7 years. And the first time the cork is planted, it takes 30 years to have the first harvest. So at least we cannot complain when it's every year, and and we have to wait 7 years. So everything, you have to put it back in perspective. It's fundamental to work with people that we know in great relationship, not just people we sell to, but people we get our cork, we get our barrels, because that can have a huge impact. 1 or 2% of quality can be lost or gained just with that. So it's an ongoing work. But it's interesting as well, because it's changing, and we see different things. When you go in Portugal and visit the tree when they are being harvested, it's absolutely amazing. Everything's still done by hand, but it's a work of that, harvesting seems easy compared to that.
And hypothetically, if you were to replant some of your vineyards, or will you do replanting in the same area? But if you were to plant new vineyards, would you try to aim for more northern exposures or higher, or because you have the special terroir where you are?
Make sure I have plenty of trees surrounding everything. Narrow valley to keep as much shade and humidity as possible, or higher altitude in the Languedoc at least. That's for sure. And
how would you see? What do you see the future like, and what should we do in terms of making Languedoc, not as secretive as it maybe is? Where a lot of Finnish people in the audience, where it's not southern France is not an area where we often go for example, holidays. Similar to like Brits or maybe Americans. But is there somehow, how can we reveal those secrets to a wider audience so that people understand that Languedoc is diverse, as you mentioned, produces super age-worthy wines and not just wines that you can buy cheaply from in a supermarket? How do we show what the region has to a wider public?
I think we have to acknowledge the fact that Languedoc is a large region as a whole, so it's always going to be producing the vast majority of the everyday, maybe more supermarket wines, as opposed to Loire Valley or Burgundy, which are so tiny and in such a high demand. Languedoc, from our side, from the producer, we need more train puller, locomotive. The train puller are going to be, and again, I would say the like of Daumas. You need an estate that has sufficient production to exist, not just locally, but worldwide. Let's say 60 to 100,000 bottle production. That's not much to distribute in 40 or 50 markets, but at least to be able to do that. Right now, we have a lot of fantastic wine maker, but a lot of them are under 20,000 bottles. And with that, you just sell locally, maybe a bit to Belgium and Paris, and that's it. And for the eyes of the public, they don't see enough of those wine unless you come to Languedoc or go to Paris or wine bar specialists. At some point, you need to recognize a few top brand, and I'm talking about brand because you become a brand when it's people recognize, oh, this is this top wine from the Languedoc. There is not enough of that quality, but not just quality, volume to ensure that everybody can see it, not has seen it, but can see it maybe over the 5 continents. There was an amazing article written by the RVF 20 years ago saying exactly that. And we're still missing that. You need a strong negotiant. We have Gérard Bertrand, and maybe we need a few more, but you also need those really, the cherry on top of the cake that everybody can dream about because they've seen it, but it has changed, I look at Languedoc 40 years ago, and now things take time. We are in a world where everything has to open quickly. New iPhone, new app. But in Burgundy, it started when the monks were making wine 600 or 800 years ago, and it took 400 years to 500 years to be there. We would like to be Burgundy now. It has taken 500 years to Burgundy. Languedoc only has 25 years of history. So we are in agriculture. We are farmers. And we have to accept and everything takes time. It's like building a stone wall. It's one stone after another. And we see it as a second generation. And that's exciting too. We have so much things to do. And fortunately, that will remain for the third generation to still have things to achieve, to build not just a reputation of one estate, but also contribute to the reputation of a region. And that's where I'll conclude on this word is, we have everything in the pyramid. We have the top that maybe needs to be pushed a bit further, and we have the wide base that can also. A region is known for making amazing wine for great value. That's not a bad thing. again, yes, we can all dream about the Lamborghini or the Rolls-Royce, but not everyone drives that. So it's great to have also amazing value for money wines. And we've gone from a long way, because before it was bulk wine that people were running away from.
Well done. Well, I think that's a perfect way to conclude this wine talk.
I'm allowed to go back to my cellar now.
You can go back to your cellar, back to your harvest.
I don't know if there is any question. I've been doing most of the talk. Usually I try to avoid that. But if you have any question, I'm obviously more than happy to answer.
For the next half an hour,
I make the wine, so I should know a little bit about it. So any question, please feel free to yes.
I was quite surprised that in southern France you have a problem with freeze.
Problem with
freeze.
You know, I was surprised too. Weather change, probably weather climate. We have major frost, and the one in 2021 it affected the whole of Europe. Italy, Greece, Spain. It was actually it was frost because the month of March had been warm, so all the birds have come out. And certainly, if the birds come out late, you are safer. But certainly, the last week of February, it got cold. But not just cold, -1 or 2. It got really cold. That was exceptional. But still, having 4 years of frost over the last 6 years, it seems to be the new trend.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, we are surprised too, but we have to be ready for this kind of nasty surprise.
Great. One more?
Yeah.
How do you manage all these grapes? I mean, as far as winemaking, do you co-ferment all the grapes, or do you have?
We didn't talk, too much about.
And then you make a blending.
So everything starts with the decision of when to pick. The team and I, we were 10 people, 12 people in the cellar, in the vineyard for the last 3 weeks, picking grapes to analysis and picking grapes to taste. And then when we decide for the white, when the white comes in, we bring everything together over 4 days, all mixed together, the 20 grape varieties. But we cool down the grapes to do what is called a skin contact cold maceration. For 4 days, we stop fermentation to start by keeping the juice below 10 degrees Celsius and by doing pump over twice a day. So we extract as much as we can from the skin, because when you take a berry, when you press it, the juice is just water and sugar. All the good stuff is in the skin. If you have a heavy skin, that's awesome. If you have a light skin that decelerate, that's not so good. And so you want to extract from the skin. And after that, we send the skin to be pressed to extract the rest, and then we send to fermentation at low temperature. The higher the temperature goes when you ferment, and it can go up to 32, 33, the faster the fermentation happens, but the more you lose aromas. The lower temperature you do your fermentation, thank you, the lower temperature you do your fermentation, the more you keep the aroma, but the more dangerous it is, because it can stop. And when fermentation stops, you're in trouble. For the red, we do all the non-Cabernet Sauvignon grapes first together. And that normal Médoc vinification, we ferment right away, and then we let macerate for a month. And then we press, and then we send to malolactic. And Cabernet Sauvignon is done last, always separately. And that's where the most work happens, because we're going to wait for a month to a month and a half before the wine is done. So you could say we have 4 different harvests: the white, the rosé, the white, the non-Cabernet Sauvignon red, and the red. We will probably finish the harvest around 25th to 1st of October this year, starting today, the 28th of August. So almost a full month with 60 extra people, 50 to 60 extra people on the estate.
Great. Well, I think it's time to wrap up. So thank you ever so much for coming here, and good luck with the harvest.
Thank you. Merci.